Okay, hello and welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History channel where we bring you history in a friendly, neighborly manner. And I'm really excited about today's video. I have just uploaded a new playlist of my hot takes where I give unpopular historical views on a particular subject at a particular time that might be relatively interesting to those of you who are checking out the channel. Consider liking and subscribing. Someone suggested when they watched some of my hot take videos that I actually not just offer the opinion, and of course I do that in a 15-second short where I probably talk too fast, but also that I should go into detail in explaining each of my hot takes and giving a defense of them. So that's what I'm going to be doing in today's video. So I hope you really enjoyed that as me, a historian, reviews another brilliant, good-looking historian who just so happens to also be me. And if you enjoy that, if you like history, if you like the way I talk about history, and you like what we do here, consider liking and subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. We are just over 7,700 subscribers, so the Friendly Neighborhood Historians are growing, so you can be one of them if you like and subscribe. So we're going to start and take a look at 10 of my 30 hot take videos, and I will be giving more explanation as to why I have this particular perspective. So let's start off. Here's a historical and religious hot take. Most of the medieval church's changes to pagan practices and holidays, such as Christmas and Easter, are not appropriations of those symbols and gods into Christian form, but are simple replacements of those holidays with Christian customs and saints. So this is obviously one of my most recent hot takes, and I'm going from newest to oldest. But this one is where I discuss how Christmas and Easter, despite the fact that there are pagan celebrations surrounding them, are actually the Christian celebrations are not like a lot of people like to believe. Neo-pagans like to believe this. Secular people like to believe this. That Christianity just copied and borrowed from ancient Norse, Saxon, Greco-Roman traditions and religions. Not true. Christianity developed its own themes and religious holidays in time due to a regulated Christian calendar that just so happened to coincide in a lot of ways with the pagan some of these pagan celebrations. Easter comes from Oester, who is an Anglo-Saxon goddess, but the celebration of Easter amongst Christians in the Christian church, even in the medieval era, as Christianity was taking over Europe and replacing Anglo-Saxon and paganic customs with its own customs, it's not them taking and saying, okay, it's not them taking this holiday and saying we're going to this pagan is actually Jesus. No, it's saying this is our celebration for Jesus, and since you're a Christian now, this is what you must celebrate: his resurrection, not Oester or any of these other pagan gods. Same thing with Christmas. Obviously, Saint Nicholas is based on a Christian saint who was extremely popular in the fourth century, and that becomes the inspiration for Santa Claus. Santa Claus is actually being remodeled by more secular people to be less religious than he actually was originally intended. This is not from a religious perspective or lens. Yes, Christianity obviously conquered and forced a lot of people to join the Christian church in medieval Europe and abandon the customs that they had before. But they did not just steal those customs and then give them Christian names. They had established Christian customs that were already quite popular, and then basically it was like you can't celebrate this anymore, but you can celebrate this other religion. And again, this is a hot take because a lot of people want to believe that Easter is really a pagan holiday and Christians have no business celebrating it. Even a lot of Christians, for some reason, believe that. But no, the medieval church was not in the business of basically revamping pagan deities and celebrating them as Christian saints and leaders. They were in the business of taking pagan practices and peoples and giving them a Christian and Christianizing them through baptism and through other practices and customs. Here's a historical hot take. Given the dangers of their political and geographical position and the constant existential crisis they would take, the Israelis took the largest gamble in political history, especially of the 20th century, by declaring their independence and the end of the British Mandate in Palestine in 1948. So here I'm discussing, and I'm pausing quickly because then it's automatic play, and I forgot to turn off the automatic play. But basically, I'm making the case that Israel took the biggest political gamble in history, not more than the Americans did with the Declaration of Independence. Yes, the American leaders would have been hung and executed afterwards, but the American colonies would have still existed. If Israel's political gamble and basically having the British take off the training wheels did not work out for them, they would not have anywhere to go, and many of them would have died because the immediate fighting with the Arabs because they couldn't reach a two-state solution, which continues to this day, unfortunately, led to the Arab-Israeli War, led to a million Arabs being displaced, Jews being exiled all over the Middle East, and the Israelis eventually surprisingly winning against all odds. So they had a very low chance of success, and there was a certainty of death for many of them, and yet they still took that risk. So it's the biggest political gamble ever for Israel to declare its independence and the end of the British Mandate in Palestine. Here's a historical hot take that's a wee bit controversial and a wee bit political. Since, according to the 22nd Amendment of 1951, the president is the only federally elected official with term limits, either the president, Congress, and the Supreme Court at the very least should have term limits, or none of them should have term limits. So this comes in the wake of Donald Trump. A lot of the conversation around Donald Trump is, will he be a third term president because he's a non-consecutive president, he wants the straight 8 years, so he wants a third term in 2028. That's not going anywhere. The 22nd Amendment is very clear and it's not going to get changed anytime soon. The president can only be elected twice. That's in honor of George Washington. It's tradition, it's why it's there. But take it from a historian, even some traditions don't deserve to necessarily be there. The Congress has never had term limits. The only reason a president has had a term limit, either by tradition or by force, the 22nd Amendment passed in 1951 after Franklin Roosevelt was elected 4 times and would have served 16 years had he not died in office. Congress basically decided to limit the number of times the president can be elected. He is the chief executive and the head of the nation, and in the last century has become a more and more powerful figure as the imperial presidency just seems to grow and grow. So the truth of the matter is, the president of the United States is obviously a very powerful figure, but that doesn't mean that he necessarily should have term limits if no one else in the government is going to have term limits. Congress people do not have term limits. They're there for decades on end. Supreme Court justices do not have term limits. Federal courts don't have term limits. It's only the President of the United States, either all or nothing at all. That was my argument here. Here's a historical hot take. Constantine the Great, who legalized Christianity at the beginning of the 4th century, defeated all of his enemies, united the Roman Empire, created his own dynasty, and established a new capital in Byzantium that he named after himself, the Nova Roma. Constantinople was the first official European ruler. Here's his. So I went into the next hot take. Basically, in that video, for me, Constantine legalizing Christianity and changing the locus of the Roman Empire to being an empire for the Romans and an empire more and more for its growing Christian population reflects the fact that there's a new capital, there's a new culture, there's a new religion on the rise, and that is what's going to dominate Europe culturally in the Middle Ages. So I think of Constantine more as a European. He obviously comes from England. His father is a junior emperor. He rises to junior emperor, defeats Maxentius at the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 311, and then after that is able to legalize Christianity, stabilize the practice of Christianity with the Council of Nicaea, and eventually accept Christian baptism. So his focus on Christianity, the Nova Roma, the new capital in Constantinople, and all the other efforts of Constantine the Great make him more of a European emperor than a Roman one. Historical hot take: of all the presidents who were generals, like George Washington, Andrew Jackson, and many others, Zachary Taylor, the 12th president, was the best general in the lot. The hero of the Mexican American War, who never lost a battle, used that victory to catapult him into the White House in 1849. So, this one, a comment I received here was, well, Dwight Eisenhower was the best American general. And it's true, Dwight Eisenhower was never defeated and, of course, was the brilliant mastermind behind the D-Day and Normandy campaigns. But Zachary Taylor, unlike Dwight Eisenhower, actually led troops into battle. Eisenhower actually never participated in combat, despite fighting in what I call World War II and World War III, and what you may call World War I and World War II. Taylor was the successful frontier general who fought a lot of different Indian tribes successfully and never lost a battle, winning two major ones, Palo Alto and Buena Vista, in the Mexican American War, which helped the United States get the Southwest and California. Now, the Americans would probably have won that war with or without Taylor, but the fact that he was so successful and that helped him become president, there hasn't been a president or general. There hasn't been a general as successful who became president as Zachary Taylor. Lincoln lost a lot. I mean, not Lincoln. Washington lost a lot of battles. Um, and Andrew Jackson lost a lot of battles and killed a lot of people that he didn't necessarily need to kill when fighting them. So that explains that historical hot take. And here's a historical hot take. The Mongol Empire, which grew the quickest in history, becoming the largest contiguous land empire in all of human history, is overrated due to the fact that it was not very good at administering, and once it broke down into 4 separate kingdoms, it started to decline. So I'm sorry about the text covering my head. I don't always edit it properly. I need to go back and fix that. But basically, this hot take is a hot take because a lot of people think the Mongols were the best ever. Probably when it comes to conquering, they created the largest contiguous empire in history, but they weren't the best at administering. Well, they allowed local customs, religions, and practices to continue in their different khanates, the 4 different kingdoms they split into, the Chagatai, um, known as the Golden Horde, the Ugatai, the Ilkhanate, and the Yuan dynasty in China. The Mongol Empire was declined very quickly, not lasting for more than a couple of centuries in those areas, and they had to split because they were so massive. So great empire, great at conquering, not as great at ruling. Most Chinese dynasties last for centuries, but Yuan dynasty lasts for under a century, and those were the Mongols under Kublai Khan and others. Here's a historical hot take. The papacy, although one of the most hallowed institutions in all of Western history, is one of the most controversial, with a long line of corrupt, unstable, and immoral people holding onto and using its power for their own means and selfishness. Some people have said this is not a hot take and that nobody would think this, but with the election of a new pope and with Catholicism being the second largest religion in the world and the largest Christian religion in the world, I actually think that it's very fair for me to go down this route. There have been many popes that are nice, good men who wanted to practice the Christian faith to the best of their ability, and there have been many popes who have used their papal power to gain as much corrupt influence, wealth and dominance as possible. Look at Julian II. Look at the Papal States and all the warrior popes who led forces into battle in the 14th and 15th centuries. Look at Leo X, who was more of a hunter and gambler, who was so corrupt that, and the Papal Holy See was seen as so corrupt that it led to the Protestant Reformation. These guys were pretty corrupt at different periods for different reasons, and there was a pope who was caught in bed with two women right before he died when he was only in his 20s. There was a pope who had an illegitimate son. There was a pope who dug up the remains of his predecessor and put him on trial as a heretic. The idea of the papacy being a holy institution with only chaste men in it is not true. It's a historical hot take to say the papacy is one of the most corrupt institutions because it's one of the most hallowed institutions at the same time. Two things that seem paradoxically contradictory can be true here. Here's a historical hot take. The French Revolution is the most contradictory, paradoxical, and failed revolution. And I don't know why I'm looking up. I apologize because I know I have a bad habit of that. I'm trying to fix that. I'm trying not to look up, but it's usually when I want to figure out what I'm going to say next. And I'm sorry about that. Again, all of these small things with the text covering my head, misspellings, I'm working on that stuff. I'm trying not to talk too fast either. In human history, as despite its attempts to achieve a reasonable society, it led to endless violence, disruption, and the rise of a dictator in the form of the Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte. So, yes, I know the eye staring is distracting, but the truth of the matter is, I think I'm absolutely right here. Funny, I agree with me again. And the reason I'm going to explain this position is the French Revolution was supposed to be governed by reason and the Enlightenment and the principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, and it ended up being governed by almost none of those. Within 5 years of the tennis court or oath, which is the painting back there where the French Revolution really gets started, 5 years after they stormed the Bastille to gain weapons for French prisoners and start their political fighting, the Reign of Terror had taken over, where the Committee of Public Safety had gone from being able to protect the revolution to just killing people at will. And you can tell that because its own leader, Maximilien Robespierre, was killed by that very same committee for being a traitor to the revolution. And the ironies and the contradictions and the bloodshed and the horror eventually ends in perfect fashion with Napoleon Bonaparte himself being executed, or sorry, not executed, but Bonaparte himself becoming a dictator and a despot despite saying that he is the succession of the French Revolution. So this revolution that was supposed to give equality ends up with a dictator. It's the paradoxical irony that is the French Revolution, and that's why it's such a big failure. Here's a historical and philosophical hot take. Whatever you think of communism, Karl Marx is perhaps the most consequential economist in modern history, as his theories impacted millions and shaped the lives and destinies of tens of millions throughout the world in the 20th century. This one I don't think is that hard for people to agree with. I think it's a hot take because people confuse most impactful with best or think that I'm speaking about him in necessarily positive language. I'm not. I'm not a big Karl Marx fan. I think that you can't have a 20th century, you can't have the Soviet Union, the rise of American hegemony all over the world, the rise of the almighty dollar, communism in China. You can't have these things, obviously, without Marx developing a cohesive, coherent, systematic approach to communism that previous communists and socialists really hadn't been able to explicate until he was in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s. So the truth of the matter is, well, I think a lot of people could see the calamitous results of that. Marx's theories and ideas, whether they were followed or warped by his successors and those who claimed to be his successors and the wannabes and the bees, were actually extremely calamitous and impactful throughout the 20th century, making Marx the most important economist and thinker of the 19th century, who's the most important in the 20th century as well because of the impact and application of his theories.
Here's a historical hot take. Napoleon's greatest moment was his daring escape from Elba in
This is the last one, by the way, and I'm sorry I misspelled Elba. ELBA.
1814, when, after being vanquished there by the Sixth Coalition and the Russians, he returned to France, mustered his forces, and was finally defeated for good at Waterloo a year later and exiled to St. Helena.
So this is one of my favorite moments is when Napoleon, while the Allies, the Sixth Coalition, the Prussians, the Austrians, the Russians, the British, under Clemens von Metternich, the Austrian Foreign Secretary, are reorganizing Europe and setting up a system that will last for a century until the Great War, what I call World War II, and most of you know as World War One, because that's a big hot take. The 7 Years' War is the First World War. I'm sorry, it's true. So and that's a hot take I haven't done yet, but I've done videos on that. Please go check them out on the channel. I'll have a card for that. But basically, um, Napoleon, while the Allies are getting together to set up a new system that will operate Europe for a century in balanced power, where no one can become an emperor and continental conqueror the way Napoleon is, or Napoleon was. Napoleon escapes his guards in Elba, flees to France, and then rallies the French forces around him. He supposedly lands on the coast, and French forces come to arrest him, and he rips open his jacket and says, "I am your emperor. Will you strike me?" And instead of striking him, they pledge their allegiance to him. He rallies his forces for one big showdown and is defeated by the Duke of Wellington and Field Marshal Blücher at Waterloo. And that is one of the daringest, gutsiest moves in all of history, certainly in all of European history. And I think daring moves might be great. The daringest moments, or the most daring moments, might be the greatest moments. And I think that definitely applies to Napoleon. So, anyways, that is the last one there, and that is 10 videos, um, 10 hot takes. I will do another one, so I've got 2 more parts for this because there's 30, and there's gonna be more hot take videos, so please check out those shorts. There's a lot more. Rome's Roads is in the next one, yeah, consider liking there's the stop share button that I was looking for. Consider liking and subscribing and becoming a friendly neighborhood historian. I upload every Monday and Friday at 8 PM Eastern Standard Time, so looking forward to seeing you there. We have live streams, Q&As every Friday and Saturday at 6 PM Eastern, and Sundays a live stream lecture at 4 PM Eastern Standard Time. I hope you really enjoy this and you were able to get more of my ideas fleshed out, more of an explanation there. I'm working on talking slower, I'm working on all of that stuff, but at least you got some explication of my various historical hot takes, where they come from, and why I happen to have them. Have a great weekend. Take care. Like and subscribe. Leave a comment with some feedback and suggestions. I'm always willing to grow and get going. And if you really, really want to support this channel, become a member and you get some exclusive perks and benefits. Have a great weekend. And remember, love history. Bye bye now.